The East River glittered like a string of black diamonds beneath the Brooklyn Heights mansion. From the staff entrance where I stood, I could see Manhattan's glittering skyline reflected in the dark water, a reminder of all the dreams this city held that still felt so far beyond my reach. The night air carried a hint of salt and diesel fuel, the eternal perfume of the harbor that had shaped this city, and as I would soon learn, my family's destiny. I adjusted my server's uniform plain black dress, white apron, hair slicked back into a tight bun that already gave me a headache, and took a deep breath before entering the lion's den. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed down the cheap polyester dress. This wasn't just another catering gig. This was the 75th birthday celebration of Don Salvatore Valente, the Sicilian patriarch whose name was whispered with equal parts respect and fear throughout Brooklyn's oldest neighborhoods. Even in Bensonhurst, where I grew up, children knew to speak of the Valentes with careful reverence, though no one could quite explain why. Remember? Lena. Marcus, our catering manager, gripped my shoulder with unnecessary force, his fingers digging into my flesh through the thin fabric. His perpetually sweat-dampened face leaned close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on his breath. Eyes down. Silent service. You signed the temporary NDA. These people don't want to be remembered. They want perfect service from invisible hands. Understand, no making eye contact, no listening to conversations, no recognizing anyone, even if the goddamn mayor walks in. You're furniture tonight, get it? His words weren't new. Every high-end catering job came with similar warnings. But there was an edge to Marcus's voice tonight, a nervousness I hadn't heard before. The Valente name clearly meant something to him beyond just another wealthy client. I understand, I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite my instinct to pull away from his grip. I needed this job too badly to make an enemy of Marcus. Every catering gig was assigned based on his whims, and single mothers weren't exactly in a position to file workplace complaints. The truth was, this job would pay triple the usual rate enough to finally fix the leaking ceiling in our apartment that the landlord had been getting to for 6 months, enough to maybe buy Maya new shoes instead of the second-hand ones she never complained about even when I noticed her rubbing her toes after school, enough to pay down some of Nona Katerina's medical bills that kept arriving with red final notice stamps that made my stomach clench every time I opened the mailbox. $738 a month for pills that kept Nona alive but weren't fully covered by the patchwork insurance we could afford. Another $800 for Maya's tuition at Little Linguists, the bilingual preschool that was stretching my budget to breaking point, but gave her the chance to connect with her heritage in ways that might actually benefit her future. The monthly payment was always a struggle, but I'd heard her chattering in Italian last week with such natural confidence that I'd cried in the bathroom after tucking her in. At 26, being a single mother while caring for my elderly grandmother meant I couldn't afford pride, or rest, or any of the small indulgences that other women my age took for granted. I worked at Bellinot restaurant 5 days a week, serving pasta and pouring wine with a smile plastered on my face, no matter how rude the customers or how much my feet ached. Weekends were for catering gigs like this one, higher pay, but higher stress. Sleep was a luxury I'd reacquaint myself with when Maya turned 18. For now, 4 hours a night was my normal, supplemented by coffee so cheap it barely deserved the name. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew, was that beneath my carefully maintained American accent lay another voice, the voice of Eris, Sicily, passed down from Nona to me during long evenings in our tiny Bensonhurst apartment. A dialect so specific it could pinpoint not just the village, but the very neighborhood a speaker came from. In America, this heritage was my secret treasure, something private we kept within our family walls. Nona had insisted on teaching me from the moment I could speak, drilling the specific cadences and ancient vocabulary into me with a fervor I didn't understand until years later. Our words are who we are, she would say, her gnarled fingers gently correcting my pronunciation. When everything else is taken, our language remains. As a child, I'd played along to make her happy. As an adult, Those evening lessons became my connection to a history I'd never personally known but somehow lived in my bones. I kept the dialect hidden not out of shame but out of instinct. It was ours, something precious and private, in a world that demanded we assimilate, flatten our differences, become generically American. Maya was learning too, though her modern Brooklyn accent gave the ancient words a charming twist that always made Nona laugh and clap with delight. But tonight, surrounded by the wealth and power of people who might have known the same mountain villages, the same narrow streets, I felt the dialect sitting in my throat like a secret weapon or a ticking bomb. I swallowed it down and focused on becoming what Marcus wanted: furniture, invisible, unmemorable. The Valente mansion pulsed with controlled power. It was a fortress disguised as a residence, old money Brooklyn Heights architecture on the outside, state-of-the-art security hidden within the crown moldings and behind the oil paintings. I'd noticed the subtle cameras, the earpieces worn by men stationed at key positions who weren't dressed as waitstaff but weren't quite guests either. The place reeked of old money trying to distance itself from its not-so-clean origins. Men in tailored suits worth more than my annual income mingled with women dripping in jewels that could have funded Maya's college education several times over. I recognized a local councilman whose campaign posters plastered our neighborhood during the last election, the owner of a shipping company whose labor disputes regularly made the news, and several faces I'd seen in newspaper photos of Red Hook port dealings, white-collar criminals and their enablers, playing at respectability while the real muscle stayed discreetly in the shadows. The guests spoke in a mix of English, Italian, and business jargon, discussing property developments, dock contracts, union negotiations. Phrases like favorable inspections and expedited permits floated through conversations with meaningful glances exchanged. I kept my expression neutral as I drifted between them, years of practice allowing me to become part of the background, just another dark uniformed server moving through the space. I moved silently between groups, offering champagne, collecting empty glasses, invisible, just how I wanted to be, until I wasn't. Don Salvatore Valente sat at the center of the room like a spider in his web. Despite his 75 years, he remained imposing, tall and straight-backed, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that seemed to absorb everything without revealing anything in return. His tuxedo was impeccable but subtle, its quality evident in how perfectly it draped across his still broad shoulders. No flashy pins or gaudy rings marked him as important. He didn't need such obvious symbols. The deference shown by everyone around him, the subtle shifts in posture, the way conversations paused when his gaze passed over them, spoke volumes about his position. I'd seen photos of Don Salvatore in the past, usually distant shots accompanying news articles about Port Authority contracts or historic building renovations. Those grainy images hadn't captured the magnetic force of his presence. He exuded the quiet confidence of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard, who had never needed to rush because no one would dare start without him. Age had not diminished his authority. If anything, it had distilled it into something more potent. Even in a room filled with wealthy power brokers, he was clearly the center of gravity. Guests approached his table with barely concealed nervousness, offering birthday wishes with the reverence of subjects addressing royalty. When he raised his empty glass, I approached automatically, head bowed as Marcus had instructed, focusing on the polished marble floor beneath my aching feet. Then he spoke, not in English, but in the ancient Sicilian dialect of the mountain villages, words that transported me instantly to Nona's kitchen, to the smell of simmering tomato sauce and the feel of rough wooden spoons in my small hands as she taught me to stir properly. Portami u vino rosso vecchio, cidu da cantina sutana, he said, his accent perfect, undiluted by decades in America. Bring me the old red wine from the lower cellar. The words bypassed my conscious mind, reaching directly into memory and instinct. For a heartbeat. I wasn't in a Brooklyn Heights mansion, but back in Nona's kitchen, responding as I'd been taught. Without thinking a fatal mistake, I responded in the same dialect, with the proper honorific reserved for village elders and the slight formal inflection specific to the coastal areas of Eris. Subito, Don Valente, Lu portu ora, siu respetu. Right away, Don Valente. I'll bring it now, with respect. The words flowed from my lips with the natural cadence of my grandmother's village, my body automatically executing the slight bow that would have been expected in the old country, right hand briefly touching the heart. Eyes lowered, but not completely cast down. The gesture of respect without subservience that marked proper mountain manners. Only as the last syllable left my mouth did awareness crash back. The heavy silence registered first, then the sudden stillness of bodies around me. Finally, the weight of dozens of eyes turning in my direction. The room froze as if someone had pressed pause on a film. I realized my error immediately. Blood drained from my face as the silence stretched, thick and dangerous as black ice. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I fully comprehended what I had done. I'd broken the cardinal rule. I'd made myself visible. I'd shown knowledge I shouldn't have, revealed a connection to their world that no anonymous server should possess. Worse, I'd responded with the exact regional accent of someone born and raised in the coastal villages, not the generic Sicilian a language student might learn, but the specific cadences of someone with family ties. Every instinct screamed for me to retreat, to mumble an apology and disappear back into the kitchen. But years of Nona's teachings held me rooted in place once you've shown respect to an elder in such a formal way. Backing away without dismissal would be a grave insult. So I stood frozen, feeling the weight of evaluation from Don Salvatore and the sudden, intent focus of everyone around him. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Glasses hung suspended between tables and lips. The music from the small string quartet in the corner trailed off awkwardly as the musicians sensed the shift in atmosphere. Even the other servers had paused in their movements, uncertain what had happened but aware something significant had changed in the room's dynamics. Don Salvatore's eyes narrowed, studying me with new interest that reminded me of a biologist examining an unexpected specimen. The intensity of his gaze made me want to shrink into myself. But pride, known as ever-present gift and curse to me, kept my spine straight despite my thundering heart. "What's your name, girl?" he asked, switching to English but maintaining the commanding tone that expected immediate answers. "Lena Russo, sir," I whispered, eyes dropping to the floor as protocol and self-preservation finally aligned. My mouth felt dry, tongue sticking to the roof as I tried to swallow. Russo. The name seemed to resonate with meaning I didn't understand. He exchanged a loaded glance with an elegant older woman beside him, his sister. I would later learn who leaned forward with sudden intensity, the diamonds at her throat catching the light as she moved. Her eyes, nearly identical to Don Salvatore's, in shape and color, sharpened with calculation. "From where in Sicily?" Don Salvatore continued, his casual tone belied by the alertness in his posture. The question wasn't idle curiosity, it carried weight, significance I couldn't fathom but instinctively feared. I hesitated, weighing my options in milliseconds. Lying seemed unwise, these people would know, somehow. But the truth felt dangerous too, for reasons I couldn't articulate even to myself. "My grandmother is from Eris. Sir, I was born here." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, a small miracle. A ripple passed through the room like an invisible current. I noticed several men murmuring to each other, heads bent close, some reaching for phones discreetly. Across the room, an older gentleman with a cane nearly dropped his champagne, his rheumy eyes fixed on me with an expression that mingled shock and something like fear. By the bar, two younger men in modern-cut suits stopped their conversation entirely, turning to stare openly. Most concerning was one guest, a hawk-faced man in his 40s, with a too-perfect tan and a watch that gleamed ostentatiously even in the subdued lighting. Unlike the others who whispered, he made no attempt to hide his interest. He was subtly taking my photo with his phone, the device partially concealed by his suit jacket, but the movement unmistakable. My instincts screamed danger as his cold eyes catalogued every detail of my appearance. The air in the room had changed, charged now with something beyond mere curiosity. I felt suddenly exposed, as if standing under harsh spotlights rather than the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers. The weight of history and hidden knowledge pressed down on me, though I couldn't begin to understand what secrets my simple response had stirred. All I knew with absolute certainty was that I was no longer anonymous, no longer safe in my invisibility. The serving tray in my hands felt heavier by the second. Sweat gathered at the small of my back, and I fought the urge to flee, to race home to Maya and Nona and pack our meager belongings before these people, whoever they truly were, could reach them. But it was another man who truly terrified me. Standing slightly behind Don Salvatore was who I assumed to be his son, Tall, with the same commanding presence but harder, colder, like the difference between aged whiskey and surgical steel. He appeared to be in his late 30s, though the severity of his expression made age difficult to determine. Where Don Salvatore's power seemed rooted in tradition and history, this man's authority was more modern, more precise, a digital algorithm to his father's analog force. He wore his expensive suit like armor, each piece perfectly tailored to his athletic frame. His dark hair was cut in a style that walked the line between corporate and fashionable, and a barely perceptible scar bisected his left eyebrow, the only flaw in an otherwise perfect facade, the only hint that he might be human rather than a machine designed for control and calculation. Most unsettling were his eyes, dark and intelligent. They looked at me with an expression that calculated value and risk in the same glance, as if running complex equations where I was merely one variable among many. While the other guests seemed surprised, he looked merely intrigued, which somehow felt more dangerous. Surprise was emotional, intrigue was tactical. His gaze made me feel like a chess piece whose unexpected move had opened up new strategic possibilities. Adrian, Don Salvatore addressed his son without looking away from me, the name rolling off his tongue with a hint of the old-world pronunciation. Make space at our table for Miss Russo. It wasn't a request, it was an order, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had never learned the difference between the two. No one would refuse him, least of all his son, who nodded once, sharply, the movement economical and precise. I felt a rush of panic at the directive. Sitting at their table would only extend this dangerous visibility, cement my connection to whatever past they thought I represented. Being dismissed to the kitchen would be safer. I could call in sick for the remainder of the evening, collect Maya from the neighbor watching her, and figure out our next steps away from these penetrating eyes. Sir, I should really continue with my duties. The catering company, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Don Salvatore cut me off with a small gesture, just 2 fingers raised slightly from the table. Your employer will be compensated for the inconvenience. The tone made clear this was not a point for negotiation. You will join us. From across the room, I caught Marcus's eye. The catering manager looked simultaneously furious and terrified, his face cycling through emotions before settling into a sickly attempt at a professional smile. With jerky movements, he gave me a single nod, granting permission I hadn't asked for to abandon my duties. The fear in his eyes told me everything I needed to know about the power dynamics at play. Whatever Don Salvatore Valente wanted, he received, whether it was vintage wine or the undivided attention of a random waitress. As the son Adrian gestured toward an empty chair being hurriedly brought to their table, I felt the weight of my new visibility crush down on me. The distance between server and guest, a chasm normally uncrossable in these settings, had vanished with a few words of dialect. I had been seen, and in their world, once seen, you couldn't go back to the shadows. The chair was positioned directly across from Adrian and to Don Salvatore's right, a place of honor that made my discomfort spike even higher. I sat gingerly, perched on the edge of the seat like a bird ready for flight. The fine linen napkins someone placed in my lap felt alien against my cheap uniform. The contrast between my serving clothes and the evening wear surrounding me couldn't have been more stark, a visual reminder that I didn't belong here, that this invitation wasn't truly an invitation at all, but something more complicated. From this new vantage point, I could see details previously hidden during my rounds with the serving tray. the heavy security presence at the perimeter of the room, the subtle communications happening between men with earpieces. The way certain guests seemed to orient themselves toward the Valente table like flowers tracking the sun. This wasn't just a birthday celebration, it was a display of fealty, a reaffirmation of a power structure I'd accidentally stumbled into. "Wine for Miss Russo," Don Salvatore instructed, and instantly a crystal glass appeared before me, filled with ruby liquid that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I left it untouched, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. My hands trembled as I took my seat, the serving tray abandoned on a nearby credenza. The fabric of my uniform felt suddenly coarse against my skin, a tactile reminder of the division between my world and theirs. Across the room, I caught sight of the hawk-faced man speaking urgently into his phone, his eyes never leaving me. Later, I would learn he belonged to the De Luca syndicate, rivals to the Valentes, and a name that would soon feature prominently in my nightmares. I had just become a chess piece in a game I didn't understand, moved from my square without warning, placed in a position of sudden prominence and unknown danger. The rules were unknown to me, the stakes unclear, but the intensity with which these powerful strangers now regarded me made one thing crystal clear. This was no trivial matter. My knowledge of an obscure dialect had rippled through this gathering like a stone dropped in still water, and I was only beginning to feel the waves returning. As glasses clinked and conversation slowly resumed around us, I felt a weight settle in the pit of my stomach. Whatever connection these people believed I had to their world, it would not be easily severed. My thoughts flew to Maya's sleeping face, to Nona's fragile health, to our tiny apartment with its walls of family photos, the only stability I'd managed to create in an unstable world. All of it now felt threatened by this unexpected collision of my carefully separate worlds. Don Salvatore leaned slightly toward me, his voice pitched for privacy despite the ambient noise of the party. "You look troubled, Miss Russo. There is no need. You are an honored guest now." The words, meant to reassure, only deepened my unease. In my experience, powerful men didn't offer anything without expecting something in return, and the price was usually higher than advertised. "I'm just surprised," I managed to reply, finding a diplomatic middle ground between honesty and survival instinct. I wasn't expecting the dialect to be recognized. "In certain circles," he said with the ghost of a smile. "That dialect is never forgotten, especially when spoken so authentically." "So, Miss Russo," Don Salvatore's voice carried the weight of decades of command, a voice accustomed to being heard and obeyed without question. The surrounding table had fallen respectfully silent as he addressed me directly. "Your dialect is perfect. Not Brooklyn Italian, not even mainland Italian. Pure mountain Sicilian, the cadence. The honorifics flawless. One might think you were born in the village." His observation was phrased as a compliment but delivered like an interrogation. The surrounding guests watched with barely concealed interest, sensing that this interaction had layers of meaning beyond a simple conversation about linguistics. I felt like a specimen under glass, examined from all angles. "My grandmother taught me, Sir, Nonna Caterina." I kept my response simple, factual, hoping the less I said, the fewer connections they could make, but the name alone was enough to trigger a reaction. The name sent another current through the table, subtle but unmistakable. The elegant woman who introduced herself as Giulia Valente, Don Salvatore's sister, leaned forward with such sudden intensity that her necklace swung forward, catching the light. Her fingers, adorned with tasteful but significant diamonds, tightened almost imperceptibly on her crystal water glass. Caterina Russo, from the harbor district of Aris. Her question came with a precision that made my skin prickle. Not just heiress, but the specific neighborhood, the same distinction I'd been taught to make in my dialect. This wasn't general knowledge, this was personal familiarity. I nodded, increasingly uneasy with their knowledge of my family. My throat felt dry, and I reached for the untouched wine before thinking better of it. I needed my wits about me, and something told me this was a test of what I wasn't sure. "Yes, ma'am." The confirmation seemed to satisfy something for Julia, who exchanged a meaningful look with her brother. Her perfectly manicured hand moved to touch a heavy gold bracelet at her wrist, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with her otherwise composed demeanor. The only tell that this conversation was affecting her as much as it was affecting me. "She still lives, Caterina?" Don Salvatore asked, and though his tone remained casual, I sensed an undercurrent of real interest, perhaps even concern beneath the question. "Yes, she's 82 now. Still sharp as ever." I found myself adding the last part defensively, protective of Nona's dignity even in this strange situation. Despite her physical frailty, Nona's mind remained crystal clear, her memory remarkable. It was one of the things I most admired about her, how she could recall details of events from decades past as if they had happened yesterday. Julia nodded, something like respect flickering across her aristocratic features. The Russo women were always resilient, like the island itself. The comment wasn't directed at me, but rather seemed to be a private observation shared aloud. She touched the heavy gold bracelet again, a gesture I was beginning to suspect had significance beyond mere habit. Don Salvatore smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The expression reminded me of a documentary I'd once seen about crocodiles ancient. Patient predators who could wait motionless for hours before striking. The Russo family has a long history with the shipping routes between Sicily and New York. Your grandmother, if I recall correctly, kept the port ledgers during Prohibition, an important position, one that required discretion, intelligence, and a perfect memory for details. His casual revelation landed like a stone in my chest. Port ledgers, Prohibition. These weren't innocent business matters, but references to bootlegging, smuggling criminal enterprises that had built fortunes and destroyed lives. The calm way he connected my gentle Nona to such activities made my stomach clench. My mind raced, trying to reconcile this information with the woman I knew, Nona, who said the rosary daily, who volunteered at church festivals, who carefully saved every penny and insisted on honesty in all dealings. Had there been clues I'd missed? Nona had never spoken of this, or had she? There were stories she told only in fragments, tales of ledgers and manifests and ships that sailed without official records. I'd always assumed they were just colorful anecdotes, stories to entertain a curious grandchild. Now, sitting among these powerful strangers who seemed to know more about my family history than I did, those fragments began to align into a pattern I hadn't previously recognized. The careful way Nona had taught me dialect, insisting on proper forms of address for various ranks. Her detailed knowledge of shipping terms and customs procedures that I'd thought came from her husband's work as a longshoreman. Her occasional cryptic comments about owing nothing to no one, delivered with uncharacteristic fierceness. The puzzle pieces of my grandmother's past were rearranging themselves before my eyes, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. "I wouldn't know about that, sir," I said carefully, my voice steadier than I felt. The denial was automatic, a shield thrown up between these people and my family. Even if there was truth to what they were saying, some ingrained instinct told me to reveal nothing, to create distance between their world and Nona's past. Of course not. Julia's smile was a blade, elegant, thin, and dangerous. Her eyes, so similar to her brother's in color but sharper in expression, assessed me with unveiled skepticism. Why would a simple waitress know about port ledgers from the 20s? And yet she speaks our dialect perfectly, with the exact inflections of the harbor district. She took a deliberate sip of her wine, eyes never leaving mine over the rim of the crystal glass. Such a remarkable coincidence. Her tone made clear she believed in coincidences about as much as her brother did. The implication hung in the air between us that I knew more than I was admitting, that I was playing some game whose rules only they understood. The unfairness of the accusation stung, but I recognized the futility of protesting. These people had already formed their conclusions. My denials would only reinforce their suspicions. Instead, I remained silent, meeting Julia's gaze with what I hoped was dignified composure rather than the fear churning beneath my surface. Years of handling difficult customers at Bellinata had taught me that sometimes silence was the strongest response. Let them fill the void with their own assumptions. Throughout this exchange, I felt Adrian Valente's eyes boring into me like drills seeking oil. Unlike his father and aunt, who veiled their interrogation with cordial tones and social niceties, he hadn't said a word since I'd sat down, just observed with that same calculating intensity that made me feel like I was being deconstructed, analyzed, and reassembled in his mind. His silence was more intimidating than any question, creating a pressure that built with each passing moment. What did he see when he looked at me? A threat, an opportunity, a puzzle, whatever it was. The focused attention of someone so clearly powerful was its own kind of danger. I should return to work, I said, starting to rise from my seat, eager to escape the weight of their scrutiny and expectations. The other servers were moving efficiently around the room, filling glasses, clearing plates, performing the invisible ballet of high-end service. I longed to rejoin them, to disappear back into anonymous function, my legs tensed, ready to stand when Don Salvatore's single word froze me in place. Sit. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even particularly emphasized, but Don Salvatore's command was soft and unyielding as velvet over steel. The single syllable carried the absolute expectation of obedience, not through threat, but through sheer certainty that his will would be done. I found myself sinking back into the chair automatically, muscles responding to the authority in his voice before my conscious mind could protest. Your employer will understand. Tell me about your family now. His tone shifted subtly, becoming almost paternal, though no less commanding. He leaned forward slightly, his interest genuine rather than performative. You have a child? The question knocked the air from my lungs. How could he possibly know that Maya's existence was obviously no secret? I spoke about her freely at work, had photos of her on my phone, but the casual way he referenced her in this context felt like a violation, a reminder that I was utterly exposed before these people. The fact that he knew this sent a chill down my spine, an icy finger tracing each vertebra. This wasn't information gleaned from my dialect or some chance encounter. They had been looking into me, perhaps even before tonight. The thought of these powerful strangers with their dangerous connections having knowledge of my daughter made my protective instincts flare like a sudden fever. A daughter, Maya. She's 6, I answered, my tone deliberately flat, giving away nothing beyond the bare facts while my mind raced with new fears. I hoped my expression didn't betray the panic blossoming inside me, the desperate need to get back to my child, to verify her safety, to hold her close and never let her near this world that suddenly seemed to be reaching for us both with invisible hands. And her father, not in the picture, I said stiffly. And you live with your grandmother in Bensonhurst, yes, on 86th Street. My blood ran cold. They knew where I lived. Yes, I whispered. Adrian finally spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle compared to his intimidating presence. You work 2 jobs to support them. Restaurant service and catering, still struggling with your grandmother's medical bills. It wasn't a question. They'd already investigated me. How long had they been watching? My panic must have shown, because Adrian added, your background check only happened after you sat down. Standard procedure. Standard procedure. As if running instant background checks on waitresses was normal. Why am I here? I finally asked. Finding a thread of courage, Don Salvatore exchanged a look with Julia before answering. Because in our world, Miss Russo, coincidences don't exist. A Russo from Maurice, speaking our dialect, appearing at my birthday. The universe is sending a message. I wanted to tell him it was just a catering job assignment, pure chance. But something in his eyes stopped me. This man didn't believe in chance. I should take my grandmother and daughter somewhere else for a while, I said quietly, the implication clear in my voice. Adrian's eyebrow raised slightly. Are you afraid of us, Miss Russo? I'm afraid of being noticed by people like you, I answered honestly. I have Maya to think about. Don Salvatore nodded approvingly. A mother's instinct. Good, but running isn't necessary. Not yet. The yet hung in the air like a storm cloud. As our uncomfortable conversation continued, I noticed the hawk-faced man from earlier, a DeLuca. I would later learn watching our table with unconcealed interest. Something about the way his eyes lingered made my skin crawl. I didn't know then that he had already dispatched someone to drive past my apartment building that very night. That by dawn, my existence would be known to every major family in New York's organized crime hierarchy, that the name Russo would resurrect decades-old whispers about missing ledgers and secret shipping routes. All I knew was that I needed to get home to Maya and Nona, to hold my daughter close and pretend that nothing had changed, even though, deep in my bones, I felt the seismic shift that had just occurred in our lives. As the evening wound down and I was finally permitted to leave, Adrian Valente walked me to my car for my protection. He said, "Miss Russo," he said just before I got in, "my family's interest in you isn't malicious, but others might be careful." "I didn't ask for any of this," I said, my voice finally breaking with the stress of the evening. "Few of us ask for our inheritance," he replied cryptically. Then, more practically, "If you notice anything unusual, cars lingering too long, strangers asking questions, call this number." He handed me a plain business card with only a phone number. I took it without promising to use it. That night, I lay awake listening to every sound outside our apartment window. Around 3 a.m, I heard a car slow down in front of our building, idle for several minutes, then drive away. I clutched my phone, Adrian's card on the nightstand, but didn't call, not yet. The next week passed in a fog of anxiety. I jumped at shadows, checked over my shoulder constantly, and kept Maya home from school twice when my paranoia peaked. Nona noticed little escaped her sharp eyes. Even at 82, but I deflected her questions. She had enough health concerns without adding my problems. Then it happened. I was closing up at Bella Nata, taking out trash to the back alley, when I noticed the smell, gasoline. The back door was doused in it, and a cigarette butt lay unlit on the ground nearby. A warning. Someone had been interrupted before they could light it. Maria, the restaurant owner, found me frozen in the alleyway. When I explained, her face went pale. "Lena, what have you gotten mixed up in?" she whispered. When I didn't answer, she said, "This isn't random. Someone's sending a message." "I know," I said hollowly. "You need protection." "I can't afford, not that kind of protection." She cut me off. "You need a family behind you. If someone's targeting you, only another family can help." I knew what she meant. The same families that had been watching me since Don Salvatore's birthday. "I can't get involved with those people," I protested. Maria gave me a pitying look. "Honey, you already are involved. The only question is whether you'll have protection or not." That night, another car drove slowly past our apartment. This time, I called the number Adrian had given me. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "Miss Russo, someone tried to set fire to the restaurant where I work," I said without preamble, "and there's been a car watching my apartment." There was a pause. Then, "I'll send someone to watch your building tonight, tomorrow morning. We need to meet. I have to take Maya to school. We'll send a car at 9, after you drop her off." It wasn't a request. "Lena," he added, his voice softening slightly, "this is happening whether you want it to or not. Let us help." I closed my eyes, the weight of the decision crushing me, just until I figured something out. "Of course," he said, though we both knew it wasn't that simple. The next morning, after dropping Maya at school with extra hugs and a forced smile, I found a sleek black SUV waiting. The driver, a stone-faced man in a suit, opened the door without speaking. I got in to find Adrian Valente sitting in the back, looking as impeccable as he had at the party, though now in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. "Good morning," he said, as if this were a normal business meeting. "Is it?" I countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Direct. I appreciate that." The smile vanished as he continued. "The men watching your apartment are Nico DeLucas. The fire attempt was also them. Testing. Seeing how protected you are." "Why, I'm nobody." Adrian studied me for a moment. "You're Caterina Russo's granddaughter. That makes you somebody to certain people." "I don't understand what my grandmother has to do with any of this." "Perhaps not, but she does." He hesitated. "Miss Russolina, we need to move you and your family to a secure location." "I'm not leaving our home," I said immediately, "even temporarily for Maya's safety." The mention of my daughter hit its mark. "How do I know you're any safer than these DeLuca people?" "You don't," he said honestly. "But my father gave his word that no harm would come to you under our protection. That still means something in our world." I looked out the window at the Brooklyn streets passing by. My Brooklyn. The only home Maya had ever known. "I need to talk to my grandmother," I said finally. Adrian nodded. "Of course. But don't take too long. The DeLucas aren't known for their patience." That evening, I sat at our small kitchen table with Nona, speaking in hushed tones while Maya watched cartoons in the living room. I explained what had happened at Don Salvatore's birthday, the interest in our family, the threats that had followed. To my surprise, Nona didn't seem shocked. She sighed deeply, the lines in her face seeming to deepen. "I had hoped this would skip your generation," she said in Italian, "that the old debts and old secrets would fade." "What secrets?" "Nona, what does everyone think we know?" She looked at me with tired eyes. "During Prohibition and after, I kept records, ships that came and went outside official channels, names, dates, cargoes. The port ledger, they called it. Smuggling records," I translated. "Yes, but also evidence of who paid whom, who betrayed whom." She rubbed her gnarled hands together. "When I left Sicily with your grandfather, I brought certain information, insurance, to protect our new life here. And these families think you still have this information. The DeLucas always believed I had more than I showed. Their family lost power because of some entries in my ledger." I put my head in my hands. "And the Valentis, allies of a sort, in the old country. Our families had an understanding. Your grandfather was promised to one of their daughters before he met me." The pieces were falling into place. Not just a random waitress speaking dialect, but the granddaughter of a woman who held decades of secrets that could still damage powerful families today. "What should we do?" "Nona?" She reached across the table and took my hand. "If Don Salvatore offered protection, we take it. The devil, you know. Nipote, the devil, you know." The next day, I called Adrian and agreed to his terms. A safe house, protection for Nona and Maya in exchange for, well, that part wasn't clear yet, but I was certain there would be a price. 2 days later, we moved into a converted loft in Dumbo, a sleek, modern space with bulletproof windows and discreet security cameras. Maya was delighted with her new bedroom, complete with a reading nook stocked with books in both English and Italian. Nona had an Italian-speaking nurse to help with her medication and mobility. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. "What's the catch?" I asked Adrian when he came to check on our settling in. He led me to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. "No catch, just an opportunity for mutual benefit. I don't have anything you want." "Perhaps not yet," he said. "But your grandmother's connections, her knowledge of the old shipping routes, they could be valuable in the right context. Illegal context." He smiled slightly. "Let's say, historically significant context. My family has legitimate shipping and logistics businesses now. Understanding the old routes helps with the new ones." I didn't believe him for a second. There was more to this interest than historical curiosity. "I have a daughter to raise, a grandmother to care for. I can't get involved in what exactly?" he challenged. "Have I asked you to do anything illegal? We've provided safe housing, medical care, security. What have we asked in return?" "Nothing. Yet." Adrian's expression softened marginally. "Lena, I understand your suspicion. In your position, I'd feel the same. But my father believes there's a debt our family owes to yours. Let us repay it." "What debt?" "That's a conversation for another time." He checked his watch. "I need to go. But tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to show you something, to help you understand what's at stake." I hesitated, then nodded. What choice did I really have after he left? I wandered the loft, taking in the expensive furnishings, the top-of-the-line security system, the stocked refrigerator, a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Through Maya's bedroom door, I watched her playing with paper boats she'd made, sailing them in a basin of water, happy and oblivious to the currents pulling us into deep waters. I made a promise to myself then. Whatever game the Valentes and DeLucas were playing, I would learn the rules, and I would find a way to keep my family safe, not just temporarily, but permanently. The next day, Adrian took me to the port, not to the public areas, but to a private office overlooking the main shipping lanes. There, he unrolled a detailed map of the harbor. "Your grandmother understood something essential," he said, tracing shipping lanes with his finger. "Ports aren't just about goods, they're about information. Who knows what's coming and going, when, carrying what, that information is power." He explained how the Valente family had transitioned much of their business to legitimate logistics over the years, de-risking their supply chains, as he put it. But the DeLucas had gone the opposite direction, embedding themselves deeper in port corruption, using new technologies to hide old crimes. They're modernizing extortion, Adrian explained, using data leaks, digital blackmail, cyber attacks on shipping systems. And what do I have to do with any of this? Your grandmother's ledger isn't just history. It's the foundation of today's networks. The DeLucas believe she kept records that could still damage them, records they never found. And now, they think you inherited that knowledge. I shook my head in disbelief. But I didn't. Nona never showed me any ledger. Perhaps not explicitly, but you have her knowledge of the old dialect, the old ways, more than you realize. He studied me intently. "Lena, the DeLucas won't stop coming for you, whether you have what they fear or not. At least with us, you have a chance to control your own destiny." I stared out at the vast harbor, ships moving like slow dancers across the water. This world had been beneath the surface of my life all along, and now I was drowning in it. "I need to think," I said finally. Adrian nodded. "Take the time you need, but remember, others aren't so patient." As if to underscore his point, that evening I received a call from the FBI. Special Agent Isabel Park wanted to meet to discuss port security matters related to my grandmother. The net was tightening from all sides. The safe house became our new normal with unsettling speed. Maya adapted as only children can, delighting in the space and the attention from our protectors. Nona seemed to grow stronger with proper medical care, though she watched the harbor from our windows with a faraway look that worried me. And I learned. Adrian became my reluctant tutor in this shadowy world. Each day brought new information about shipping routes, customs procedures, union politics, Port Authority contracts. I absorbed it all, building a mental map of the power structures that had operated beneath the surface of my city all my life. "You're a quick study," Adrian observed one evening, after I'd correctly identified the weak points in a shipping company's security protocols. I had to be single mom, immigrant family, no safety net. I closed the laptop we'd been working on. "Adrian, what happens if the DeLucas find what they're looking for or decide I don't have it?" He considered this, his face unreadable. "Best case, they back off, focus on other threats. Worst case." He didn't finish. "Would you still protect us then if we weren't useful anymore?" The question hung between us. Adrian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Whatever happens, Lena, I'll make sure you and Maya have a safe exit. New identities, relocation, legal protection. You have my word." I studied his face, searching for deceit but finding none. "Why would you do that?" "Because not everything is business." He stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy." As Adrian predicted, the next day brought chaos. A hack at the public hospital had nearly exposed Nona's medical records, searching for her home address. One of Adrian's tech team, the Blue Team they called themselves, had caught it just in time, setting up digital tripwires that fed false information back to the attackers. Then Agent Park resurfaced, cornering me outside Maya's school with an offer I couldn't ignore. Cooperate with the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force in exchange for witness protection. She knew about the DeLucas, the Valentes, even our safe house. "You're in over your head, Lena," she said, her eyes sympathetic but determined. "These families have been feuding for generations. You and your daughter are just pawns to them." And what would I be to the FBI? Something more than a pawn. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. An asset, yes, but one we'd protect. I thought of Maya, of Nona, of the life I'd worked so hard to build. "I need time to think." "Don't take too long," she warned. "And don't tell Valente about our conversation. He wouldn't understand." I didn't promise either way. That evening, I found Maya in the living room with an unexpected visitor. Adrian sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully folding a piece of paper under my daughter's instruction. No, like this," Maya said, taking his hands and guiding them. "The boat won't float if you don't make the bottom tight." Adrian followed her directions with surprising patience. His usually stern face relaxed into something almost gentle. When they finished, Maya carried the paper boat to her water basin to test it. "It floats," she cried triumphantly. "You're a good teacher," Adrian told her, and her beaming smile illuminated the room. He looked up, noticing me watching from the doorway. Something passed between us, a moment of understanding. Perhaps Maya had humanized him in my eyes, showing me the man beneath the armor. After Maya went to bed, Adrian and I sat at the kitchen table, the day's tensions settling around us. "Agent Park approached me today," I said, watching his face carefully. His expression hardened instantly. What did she want? The same thing everyone seems to want, information I don't have. "Did you tell her that?" I told her I needed time. I took a deep breath. "Adrian, I can't keep living like this. Maya deserves better than to grow up in hiding." He was silent for a long moment. "There might be a way to end this. A formal sit-down between the families. Clear the air about what you do or don't know. Like a peace negotiation. Something like that, with lawyers present, neutral territory." He leaned forward. "But it's risky. Bringing everyone together could escalate things. Or resolve them," I countered. "I'm willing to take that chance." He studied me with new respect. "You've changed since that night at the birthday party." I had to. I met his gaze steadily. For Maya. The next day, Don Salvatore visited our safe house, bringing with him a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed a young Nonna Caterina standing beside a ship, a distinctive emerald ring visible on her finger. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, pointing to the ring. I shook my head. "The Valente family emerald, given to your grandmother as a promise from our family to yours, a promise that was broken when circumstances changed." What promise? Protection, partnership, recognition of the Russo family's place in our shared enterprises. He sighed heavily. "Your grandfather was to marry my cousin. The emerald was the symbol of that union. When he chose your grandmother instead, the alliance was strained but not broken. Caterina kept the port ledger, and with it, our trust. Until she disappeared with the ledger during a dispute between families in 1955. Some believed she betrayed confidences. Others, including my father, believed she was protecting everyone by taking the records away from prying eyes. I tried to imagine my gentle Nonna as this keeper of dangerous secrets. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting. And now the DeLucas think I somehow have this ledger. Rumors have begun circulating that the Russo port ledger wasn't lost, merely hidden. The timing, coming just after you appeared at my birthday, is suspicious. Don Salvatore's eyes were sharp despite his age. "Someone is using you as bait. Lena, the question is, who—" I had no answer, but I felt the net tightening around my family with every passing day. The next week brought the crisis to a head. A suspicious van followed Maya and me after her dance class. Though Adrian's security team cut them off, the message was clear. Time was running out. The sit-down was arranged at an Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens, neutral territory, with representatives from each major family and their lawyers present. I arrived with Adrian and Don Salvatore. my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Nico DeLuca, the hawk-faced man from the birthday party, watched me with naked calculation as I took my seat. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Before discussions began, Maya and Nona were escorted to the restaurant's secure basement kitchen. I hated having them there at all, but Adrian had insisted it was safer than leaving them at the safe house unattended. As the meeting commenced, I surprised everyone by speaking first, drawing on everything I'd learned about Port Authority regulations. I laid out my term's legal recognition for the Russo family's historical role in the Harbor Council, based on documentation Don Salvatore could provide. My family isn't interested in power struggles, I stated clearly. We want recognition and security, legally obtained, nothing more. DeLuca's smile was cold. Bold demands from a waitress. Before I could respond, he played his hand. A video appeared on the conference room screen, seemingly showing Adrian discussing price fixing and money laundering operations. The evidence looked damning until Adrian's tech team analyzed the metadata, revealing it as a sophisticated deep fake. The accusation and counter-accusation escalated tensions. Men shifted in their seats, hands moving subtly toward concealed weapons. The lawyers looked increasingly nervous. Through a barely perceptible signal from Agent Park, who was monitoring from outside, I learned that DeLuca had bribed a port commissioner. This information gave me leverage I desperately needed. As tempers flared, I produced my own surprise reading aloud from a legal clause in a 1955 accord that Don Salvatore authenticated, establishing the right of Russo descendants to claim oversight positions in port operations. This isn't about old grudges, I said firmly. It's about legal recognition of historical rights, moving forward in legitimate business. The meeting reached its flashpoint when Carlo Ventresca, the Valente family accountant, received a phone call and abruptly tried to leave. Adrian's security stopped him, confiscating his phone to discover crypto transactions linking him directly to DeLuca. The betrayal was exposed, but it triggered DeLuca's backup plan through an earpiece. He commanded his men to move in, but Adrian's tech team had compromised their communications, causing them to breach at the wrong moment. Chaos erupted briefly, with flashbangs and smoke, but no gunfire. When the confusion cleared, the digital evidence was overwhelmingly in the Valente family's favor, and by extension, mine. The second act of the drama unfolded immediately after, when FBI and NYPD organized crime task force agents appeared with warrants targeting DeLuca's financial operations. Agent Park personally ensured my status as a protected witness. Carlo was arrested, his laptop revealing a document called Manifest Nero, essentially a black book of port bribes and payoffs stretching back decades. In the tense aftermath, Adrian made a strategic concession, placing his legitimate logistics holdings in escrow to secure safe passage for my family for the next 48 hours. It was a business decision, he claimed, but his eyes told a different story. Just as it seemed we might find a resolution, DeLuca played his final, desperate card. News came that Nona had been kidnapped from the restaurant kitchen during the confusion. We raced to the address provided, only to discover it was a diversion. The real target had been Maya all along, while we'd been led on a wild goose chase. DeLuca's men had taken my daughter. My world collapsed into a single, desperate focus. Nothing mattered but finding Maya. Adrian mobilized every resource at his disposal, while I reached deep into my memory for anything that might help. A sudden inspiration struck. I called an old Sicilian dockworker, a friend of Nona's, and described the markings I'd glimpsed on a container in the background of the ransom photo. He identified it as being at Pier 39, an old, rarely used section of the port, in the driving rain. Adrian and I raced to the pier, coordinating with his security team but refusing to wait for them. On the rooftop of the warehouse, we found Maya frightened but unharmed, being held by two of DeLuca's men, working in silent coordination. Adrian and I didn't shoot to kill but strategically blocked escape routes, cornering the kidnappers until they surrendered. I held Maya tightly as Adrian's team secured the scene, her small body trembling against mine. "You came, Mama," she whispered. "I knew you would. Always, baby, always." I kissed her head, tears mixing with rain, over her shoulder. I met Adrian's eyes and saw something there I hadn't before, not calculation or strategy, but genuine relief. The final nail in DeLuca's coffin came when Agent Park released body cam footage at an emergency port council meeting, exposing his criminal operations in vivid detail. With federal charges mounting, DeLuca was arrested, though he left behind a network of corrupt officials still embedded in the system. In the days that followed, the Port Council issued new transparency regulations. Some contracts were canceled, workers worried about jobs, and the community buzzed with rumors about the dramatic power shift. Nona, who had suffered a mild heart attack during the ordeal, recovered slowly in the private medical facility. During one of our quiet conversations, she finally shared the full truth about our family history, urging me to remember that honor must be bound to law, not violence. Maya returned to school with psychological support to help process the failed kidnapping. Adrian visited often, now known to her as Uncle Adrian, a trusted friend rather than a fearsome protector. The press dubbed me the Sicilian Waitress, and I made one carefully planned television appearance to discuss supply chain transparency, refusing to feed the more sensational aspects of the story. Adrian, meanwhile, was making painful changes to his organization. Old guard uncles were dismissed, compliance officers hired, and a no-cash to unions accord signed. When I asked if these changes were sustainable, his answer surprised me. "They have to be," he said simply. "The old ways are dying, those who don't adapt will fall." Our relationship evolved cautiously. One evening, as we sat watching the harbor lights from the safe house window, I laid out my condition. "I'll only continue this us if you're committed to cutting off the dark money, completely." He was silent for a long moment. That would mean short-term losses, significant ones. I know. His eyes, normally so guarded, showed his internal struggle. Finally, he nodded once. "For you, for Maya, I'll do it." I believed him, though I knew the road wouldn't be easy. Agent Park approached me with an offer to consult on the harbor rebuild program, leveraging my unique position between communities. It was a chance to use my voice for positive change, and I found myself seriously considering it. Nona, growing stronger each day, started a weekend Sicilian dialect class at the local church. Maya appointed herself assistant teacher, proudly demonstrating pronunciations with perfect childish confidence. 1 year later, the landscape had transformed. Valente Russo Logistics had restructured, pivoting toward legitimate commerce and partnering with insurance companies and port authorities. The family name that had once been whispered was now printed on corporate letterhead, the Harbor Youth Lab. Teaching digital logistics skills to at-risk teenagers became my passion project. Adrian funded it, but stayed in the background, allowing me to shape its direction and values. The courts finally sentenced DeLuca, and the city acknowledged Adrian's company as a strategic partner in port reconstruction. The transition wasn't seamless. Old suspicions died hard, but each day brought progress. Nona's health stabilized, allowing her to open a small bakery specializing in Sicilian pastries. Maya thrived in her bilingual school, even performing Sicilian folk songs at the neighborhood festival. Adrian and I found our way forward carefully. On a clear autumn evening, as we walked along the Brooklyn Heights promenade, he stopped and took my hand. "I've been carrying this for too long," he said, producing a small box. Inside was the Valente family emerald, now set in a simple platinum band. "This was promised to your family once before. I'm hoping to fulfill that promise, but on different terms." Unlike the business arrangements and strategic alliances that had defined our relationship from the beginning, this was purely personal. His proposal came without fanfare or audience, just the two of us under the Brooklyn sky. "Are you sure?" I asked, thinking of our complicated beginnings. "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied. "You changed everything, Lena. How I see the world, how I want to build the future." I slipped the ring onto my finger, watching the emerald catch the light. "For better or worse?" I whispered. "For better," he insisted, drawing me close. 6 months later, we restored an antique wooden boat bearing the Valente Russo emblem as it launched on the newly established Mediterranean Heritage Route, a legitimate shipping line connecting our family's ancestral homes. I stood on the deck with Maya beside me. The tarantella played across the water as the sun set, casting golden light across the harbor. Maya looked up at me, her eyes bright with the same curiosity and courage that had carried our family across oceans and generations. "Is this our boat now, Mama?" she asked. I knelt beside her, brushing back her dark curls. "It's more than a boat, sweetheart. It's our heritage, made new." "How does it go?" she wondered, watching the water part before the bow. I smiled, feeling the weight of the emerald on my finger, the warmth of Adrian's hand at my back, and the strength of Nona's legacy in my voice. "It goes by truth," I whispered. "Only truth can take us where we need to go." As I took my place on the Port Council, the first woman and first second-generation immigrant to hold the position, I carried that truth with me. Not the secret ledgers of the past, but the open books of our future. A future where power served community, where history informed progress without defining it. The Brooklyn shoreline receded as our boat moved into open water. Behind us lay the complex web of family, loyalty, and power that had nearly destroyed us. Ahead stretched a horizon of possibility. Adrian stood at the helm, his face more relaxed than I'd ever seen it, while Maya danced with Nona on the deck, their laughter carrying across the waves. We had rewritten the old promises in terms we chose ourselves, and in doing so, found our way home.